Easy Meat by John Harvey. Chapter 1. The last words Norma Snape said to her youngest that Thursday. "You let me get my hands on you, you little tripeshanks, and I will wring your miserable neck." Like so much of Norma's life, their memory would haunt her, words like angry fingers down her throat again and again until she all but choked. And Nicky, it's doubtful if between the slam of the door and the ring of his own high pitched laughter, Nicky heard a thing. It had started the way it so often did, the four of them tumbling over one another inside a small, flat fronted, terraced house. Nicky's sister, Sheena, out of the bathroom at last and slamming from room to room in search of a clean blouse, her green factory overalls, a right shoe. Nicky, barely 15, down the stairs, three at a time, chanting along to the Walkman that hung from the belt of his jeans. "Mum, you seen my blouse?" Sheena called. "Mum, where's all the toast?" "Mum, I thought you were going to iron these." Only the eldest, Shane, fair hair and slate grey eyes, 8 days short of his 18th birthday, was still flush in the center of the worn settee, eating toast and drinking his third mug of tea while he watched the big breakfast on TV. "Mum," Norma, hair not combed out, still not properly dressed, opened the back of door to let out Grey Cat and the dog, which had been scratching at outside of the door unheeded, scuttled to its empty ball and began to bark. "For Christ's sake," Norma said, "don't you start." On the enamel drainer alongside the sink, used tea bags, bled orange onto spilt milk, a half-eaten bowl of soggy Cocoa Pops sat speckled with coffee granules. Shane's best shirt hung drying from the back of a chair, cotton knickers made of patchwork quilt along the radiator top. Norma pulled a can of dog food from the back of the fridge and began to search for the opener. "Nicky, get out of my bloody way!" Sheena's voice. "Get out of the way yourself!" From the other room, Norma heard a punch and a slap, and then above the sound of the TV, Shane's warning shout. Norma stopped out of the smoldering end of the cigarette she had lit earlier and forgotten, and fished another from the packet. Unable to find her lighter, she bent her head and lit the cigarette from the stove. "Mum, I thought you were going to iron this blouse." Sheena stood in the doorway, cream blouse in one hand, outline of her ribs visible between her off-white bra and the top of her short black skirt. She still didn't seem to have found her own other shoe. "Will you cover yourself up for Christ's sake?" Norma said. "Yeah," said Nicky, pushing past her onto the kitchen. "Nobody wants to see your feeble tits anyway." "No, then how come you're always hanging around outside the bathroom every morning?" "'Cause I'm nearly shitting myself, that's why, waiting for you to plaster your spots with polyfilla." Sheena swung out at him with her blouse, flicking it at the kidney-shaped burn mark discoloring the left side of his face. Dancing out of the way, laughing, Nicky collided with the table and then, as he tumbled off balance, kicked the dog's food all across the floor. Jesus, Norma thought. When when is he ever going to grow up? "Right," she shouted. "That's enough, Nicky. You get down here and clean up that mess. And Sheena, get shifting out of here or you'll miss your bus. A few more times late and you'll be for the sack." "Again," laughed Nicky. "Shut it," Norma said. I don't suppose," said Shane, stirring himself during a commercial break, "there's any more tea in the pot?" "That's right," said Norma, "there's not." As Nicky went to move the dog's bowl, the animal nipped at his hand and Nicky hit a smack on the nose with the bowl's edge. Straightening its front legs, the dog showed its teeth and growled, but then, thinking of a better of It backed off into the corner and whined instead. Pick on someone your own shoe size, said Shane. Pick on someone your own size, said Shane, fetching his brother a kick in the shin. Nicky, Norma pointed from the doorway. I want that cleared up by the time I get back down here, and you can sort out the crap by the sink as well. Why bloody me? Because I told you to, that's why. Shane chuckled and went back to watch the TV. When Norma came back down 10 minutes later, wearing an old jumper and sagging stretch pants to do her morning stint of cleaning the cleaning in the pub, she found Nicky with his hand inside a bag, purse open, the last £10 she had about to make her way into his pocket. You scuttering little bastard! Why do you think you are? What do you think you are doing? They are they both knew the answer to that. Fear for a moment brightening his eyes, Nicky squeezed around the back of the table and made a dash for the back door. For a big woman, Norma moved fast, faster than Nicky might have thought. He had the door 6 inches open when the flat of one hand she slammed it and slammed it shut, and with the other she slapped the side of his face, where the skin wrinkled liverish up from his neck. You thieving geck! Here! Nicky held the two £5 notes towards her, high above his head. As Norma reached for them, he swiveled fast and left her catching air, the door yanked open wide enough, then pushing shut. You let me get my hands on you, you little tripeshanks, and I will wring your miserable neck. She followed his laughter out into the yard, the bins, and empty rabbit hutch. The rustling trolley that had somehow found its way from Quicksave and never made its way back. Stepping through the gate into the narrow alley that ran between the rows of houses, she started after her son as he ran, not hurrying now, a lazy jinking step between the dog shit and the broken glass. At the alley's end, he stopped and waved the stolen money once in triumph before disappearing from sight into the street. Norma shivered and turned back towards the house. Locking up, that's what he wants. Sheena was standing with her overall buttoned, ready to leave. Here, Shane said, offering his mother his packet of silk cut. How much did he get this time? Lighting the cigarette, Norma drew in the smoke and slowly exhaled. Only all I had. And then as she lowered herself onto a chair, you'd think somewhere along the line he had learned his bloody lesson, wouldn't you? But even the petrol bomb thrown away by an angry neighbor whose house Nicky had bludgeoned twice within the same week hadn't done that. Oh, yes, when he had been laid up in the hospital, sure enough, Nicky had confessed the error of his ways, and those evenings when Norma had patiently tended to the burned marks on his arms and legs, blistering across his chest up to his neck and face, then Nicky had promised her time and again that he would change. From his trouser pocket, Shane took a small fold of tens and twenties and pressed one of the twenties into her hand. Norma looked into the grey of his eyes. Don't ask, a voice told her. If you don't want to know, thanks, she said. Thanks, love, thanks. Norma had grown up in a Rotterdam, the daughter of a steel worker and a mother. In the lengthening intervals between 6 children, had worked behind the counter in a local shop. Norma had been the last born, the one who broke her mother's spirit and finally her heart. By the time she was 3 years old, her father had thrown in his lot with a wall-eyed girl of 17 who had come to the house one evening selling Lucky Heather. Norma knew him only as a memory, an envelope of curling photographs, an edge of bitterness, sharp on the blade of her mother's tongue. So Norma had spent her early days in a carry cot beside the jars of sweets and newspapers on the counter, alternately fussed over and ignored. Whenever she cried, she was passed from one customer to another, the recipient of much chin chucking, the baby talk, a great deal of cupboard love, and all of it a transitory. Her mother was ever the last to pick her up, the first to put her down. It was drove you drove your father away. The accusation, for years unspoken, had been present only in her mother's eyes until the day, slipping back from the shop unsuspected, she had caught Norma and the 10-year-old Grey proud exploring each other behind the living room settee. Norma's grey skirt inelegantly hiked over her face. You little slut, it was you. Norma was 9 and she thought her mother was probably right. After all, two of her brothers had been feeling her up for years. When Norma was 13, the family upped and moved to Huddersfield, a house in Longswood with dark corners and the persistent smell of damp. The two eldest had left home long since, one pregnant and married and miserable, the brother off in the army, drunk in the pubs of Aldershot or Salisbury more nights than not. Norma was filling out fast, almost full grown, with a little makeup and heels. She could pass for 16, 18, even in pubs, and she did. Men knocked one another in the street and stared, hands going 19 to the dozen. Older lads bumped into her in the corridor at school. One of Norma's biggest thrills, the one she remembered because it involved neither hurt nor harm, was wailing until the lights went up in the interval at the pictures, and then in the tightest of sweaters, walking slowly left to right across in front of the screen. Like a movie star, Norma could feel eyes following her every move. Of course, as her mother never tired of warning her, there was only one way for it to end. Norma hid the pregnancy successfully for almost 7 months, wore her clothes loose, a fat girl getting fatter, nothing more. When the baby came 3 weeks early, it seemed to slip from the folds of her body like a fish, blooded and wriggling, sliding between the midwife's hand. They let Norma hold it for a minute, wet against her neck and cheek, too long for what they meant to do. Baby is small, the midwife said, tiny. We all have to pop him into an incubator just for now. Her mother and the hospital arranged for the adoption. There was no need for Norma, underage, to sign the forms. Forget it, lovely, her married sister told her. Plenty more where that came from, you'll see. There were, but she did not. Michael, in that brief time that she had held him, she had known his name, spoken it to him, soft and wandering beneath his cries. Michael. She never saw him again, nor knew where he was, and although now she supposed there were ways she could take and means she had never tried to track him down, Norma liked to think of him happy somewhere, content, a grown man he would be, maybe finally with a family of his own. When her mother's man friend, the reason they had moved to Huddersfield, backed up Norma against the cellar wall one night and tried to squeeze her breast, Norma hit him with the coal scuttle hard below the knees, and told him if he ever touched her again, she would cut off her stick and feed it to the ducks. After that, he could never walk in the local park without his eyes beginning to water. And Norma learned there were things in her life she could control if she tried. So when she became pregnant again, so stone in love with Patrick Connolly, she could no more think of life without him than the air that she breathed. It was a fully thought out, premeditated act, on Norma's part at least. Patrick was part Irish, part Scottish, part wild. At 29, almost 10 years older than Norma herself, he had drifted from Cork to Edinburgh to Glastonbury, a gentle hippie with the most violent of tempers, a musician with a raw and rudimentary guitar technique, and the voice of one of Satan's angels, or the lead singer with the stylistics at least. Weekends, Patrick would take the train to Manchester or Leeds and busk. Midweek, he sang with an uneven eight-piece soul band in the local pubs. One night, eyes closed, when he was singing AI Queen's Tired of Being Alone, Norma, emboldened by the drink, walked up to the stage and stroked inside of his thigh. They lived in two furnished rooms above a shop near the station. Sometimes Patrick hit her and she hit him back. A big girl, a big woman growing bigger. Norma was learning to punch her weight when one night, blissed out on the after effects of some good grass, Patrick said that he was what he wanted most in the world were children, a family. Norma took him at his word. During her pregnancy, he left her 4 times, staying away the Lord knows where for weeks before moving his things back in again. He tried to talk her into an abortion, and when it was too late for that, pushed her down the stairs of a double-decker bus traveling between Paddock and Longwood. Norma took out an injunction against him, but once Shane was born, he began deluging her with flowers stolen from nearby gardens, sang to her from the corridor outside the ward. 5 months after they moved back in together, Patrick shook Shane so hard to stop him crying that he cracked three of the baby's ribs. Norma had a friend in Nottingham, Rosa, who had 2 kids of her own but was otherwise living alone. It took Norma no time at all to pack her belongings and the baby onto the bus and travel south. They shared expenses, shared chores, explained about the social miserable con- conniving bastards, how we are supposed to live on this. Sang in the pub on a Friday night, played bingo, watched TV, that was it. Norma decided men were shit. She met Peter at Rosa's sister's wedding. After the reception, they went back to the house together. Norma and Peter, Rosa and some bloke none of them had set eyes on before since. Rosa found a bottle of Drambuie and drank it from chipped mugs. The man nobody knew passed around a few slips. When they paired off, Norma went with Peter. What harm was there in that? A quick shag between friends. The harm was she fell in love. Small and gentle was Peter, with delicate fingers that could read her body as if it were braille, soft dark eyes and lashes, long and curving like girls'. Whenever Norma rolled on top of him in the night, she was frightened she might crush the breath of him from out of him. He played with Shane and rocked him on his knees. Even though Shane was slow to laugh and quick to cry, Norma read the look in his eyes. Sheena was born when Shane was 2, and Nicky no more than 11 months later. It was you drove your father away, Nicky screamed whenever Peter touched him. Kicked out if ever he picked him up. It got so that he would start to cry whenever Peter walked into the room. The only one who could quieten Nicky was Norma herself. His eyes would follow her from place to place. As soon as he could crawl, he would only crawl to her. The only way she could get him to sleep was to take him into her bed. Peter spent nights on a borrowed mattress laid on the floor, nights on the couch, nights away from home. I can't take this, he told Norma. I can't take this anymore. It's all right, love, Norma said. Nicky will come around, you see. You are his dad after all. But Peter stopped coming around himself before the boy had the chance. When Norma arrived back from the shops one afternoon, all of his things had been cleared out of the cupboards. The suit he had worn for the best, so strangely like like the one of her own father wore in one of those old photographs, no longer hung in its place inside the wardrobe. There was no note. Twice a year, Christmas and birthday, he would send a card to Sheena, always with a different postmark, never with a return address. Norma told everyone she didn't care, hadn't she? And Rosa always said men were shits. But when Shane suddenly went off the rails a few years later, she was forced to admit she couldn't cope, not with them all, and Shane went off for the first time of his two spells in care. Just to give your mom a break, love, the social worker had explained. He is a good lad, she said to Norma. I'm sure he understands if he did or not. Shane never said. Especially after being released back home the second time, Shane never said much at all. You're not going into work this morning? Shane asked. Or what? Norma was sitting at the kitchen table, smoke drifting from her cigarette. Yes, she said. Yes, soon. Shane shrugged. Suit yourself. I'm off out, right? Norma nodded. One more cup of tea, one more cigarette, one more something. She'd pick herself up and get on her way.